Is it a tie rod end you have to do?
Well, on this side. Okay, so this is a 2009 little Kia Rio. It's a four-door hatchback. Customer's complaining he's got a bit of noise in the front end. So we already know it's loose, but we're just going to show you how to check the front end on this system, on this steering and suspension system. It's rack and pinion, McPherson strut setup. And then we're going to replace the loose components. So I'm underneath the left front corner. I got Frank's just going to wiggle the front end, and we can see that this tie rod, you can hear it, and you can see the movement there, and you see how the rubber boot is split. So that right there is an indication that water's gotten in there and rust, and you can see the movement from the outer tie rod where it, just let me hang the light here somewhere, where the outer tie rod fastens to the knuckle right here. That's the ball and socket joint in there is loose, so we're going to replace this outer tie rod end. And you can see it's fastened to the inner tie rod end right there, and that's the jam nut. We'll get to that. We'll pull the wheel off. We'll do that. Come to the other side, Frank. And now we're on the right front, and we also have, so Frank's going side to side on this side. You see how that tie rod dust boot is ripped as well? So that's a problem. The joint is not loose right now. We have another problem. So go up and down, Frank. Okay, I think you had it side to side. This ball joint, there, you can see it there. So do you see the movement where the ball joint fastens to the lower control arm? So this lower, and you can see the wheel move. Okay, so that means that when this vehicle is going down the road, these wheels aren't always going straight. And that's a safety issue. And also, eventually, that ball joint can break, or that outer tie rod end can break. So we don't want any movement in the front end. We're going to replace these two components. Before we take the wheels off, so when we check a front end for anything loose, there's usually a few suspects that are issues for us. Like, for example, the lower ball joint, or for example, the outer tie rod end, because they go through a lot of abuse. Think about where they're located, all the bumps and variations in the road and curbs that people hit. So they put a lot of force on those components, so they do tend to wear out. So when we check a front end, you can see through the wheel, the tie rod is located on the rear side of the wheel, and the lower ball joint is obviously located down here. So when we check a front end, what we do is you're just wiggling up and down. So you'd put a hand at the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock, and you would wiggle the wheel up and down. You want to show, Frank? And then to check a tie rod end, because the tie rod is located behind as opposed to the bottom, we would wiggle the wheel at the, we could call this the 9 o'clock and the 3 o'clock. So Frank's just going to show you. So to check a tie rod, we're just trying to pick up any movement, and you can see the wheel move slightly. So then we'd say, oh, something's wrong. And then to check the ball joint, we would go up and down like that. And this one feels solid. So we're just trying to pick up any movement in the wheel, and then we have to isolate where it's coming from.
What do they got, bolts?
Yeah, so this ball joint has been replaced before. This is the ball joint here. Okay, it's bolted to the knuckle there and on the back side, and it comes through the lower control arm there. This is the lower control arm, fastened to the frame with two bushings, one there and one up there on the front. Okay, then we have our steering knuckle, our brakes, our rotor, our strut is up there. And that's the lower ball joint that we're going to replace here on the right side. So what we're trying to do, we undid the nut, and we're trying, because it's a tapered fit into the control arm, we're trying to separate it. It's been in there for however long. So we just have to give it some persuasion, and then we can pull the control arm down. Like so. And then we'll pull then we'll pull the control arm down, swing the knuckle out, and then we'll be able to undo the two ball joint bolts to the knuckle. There's the old one, there's the new one. We have to remove the nut, obviously, to put it back in. Okay, and then so under this dust boot, it's just a ball and socket joint, and it wears out. So if I actually grab this with two hands, I would feel that the joint in here is loose, and you can see how it's a tapered fit into the lower control arm. So that's why we had to hit it with a hammer just to jar it free, and then we were able to pull the lower control arm down, get to the two bolts here, and remove these two bolts from the knuckle, and now we're ready to put the new one in. Okay, so the ball joint is in. Now Frank's got to pry down on the lower, so we can now get the stud of the ball joint into the lower control arm. Okay, so this ball joint was super easy. Some of them are challenging, require a lot more work, but this one was relatively simple, maybe 20 minutes worth of work. So now we have to put the nut on, okay? And you'll see the hole cut through the stud of the ball joint. So when we get this special nut on, that looks like that, we have to line up it's called a castellated nut, and we have to line up the slots with the hole, and then we're going to feed a cotter pin through it, and that cotter pin will just prevent this nut from loosening and coming off, which would be bad, because if the ball joint came out, the wheel would swing out, and they'd be calling a tow truck, and we'd be in a lot of trouble. So there's lots of different ways you can fold this over. Some people just fold one over like this and then snip it. Other people do both. There's really no right way or wrong way, as long as you put it in.
And it's always good so you don't get your head stuck underneath there when you're, so you just want to prevent that thing from turning.
That's it. We're going to snip that end off so it doesn't catch a shopping bag or a squirrel, and that's it.
Let me get my...
So you can see this outer tie rod, how this boot is ripped. So it was only a matter of time for water and stuff to get in there and cause problems. So this is the outer here, and it is threaded to the inner tie rod and locked in place by this, what's called a jam nut. And then same thing here as the ball joint. We had to remove the cotter pin. We're going to undo this nut, give the knuckle a few whacks with a hammer. But the first thing we need to do is just crack this jam nut loose. And then we are going to remove it and then unwind it from the inner tie rod in order to replace it. So the one main issue we have with replacing an outer tie rod end is that we affect the alignment. So the alignment means that the direction at which the wheels are rolling down the road. So if your front wheels are facing in like this, then you're going to wear your tires out as they scrub down the road like that. So this outer tie rod, that is where the toe adjustment is made. So we can either A, send it for an alignment when we're done, which is a good idea every couple of years anyways, because the alignment gets thrown out over these rough roads, and tires, can cost a lot of money. So you want to make sure they're rolling straight down the road. The other way we can go about it is if we know the alignment is good because it just had an alignment done not that long ago, we can mark the center of the outer tie rod, okay, which would either be the very tip of the stud right here. Okay, we can mark from there. So Frank put a notch on the knuckle, we can see right here. And we are going to measure it to the inside of the frame, a stationary part of the vehicle, and we are going to measure that distance. Okay, and we have to make sure our measurement is bang on right to the 16th of an inch. And then when we remove it and install our new tie rod, if we don't get the tie rod installed enough, then it will be out here, then this left front wheel is going to be facing inward. If we install the new tie rod and we thread it too far on, then the front of the wheel is going to be facing outward, and that's no good. So what we would do is we would install the new tie rod, and we would spin it on and make the fine adjustment so that this mark is in the exact same distance to our mark on the inside here as it was with the original tie rod. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to mark the knuckle right here, and then we're going to put a chalk mark or some mark on the stationary part of the frame here of the vehicle here, and just measure that distance right down to the 16th of an inch.
(15 1/8), okay?
15 1/8. So the distance from the center of that tie rod or the knuckle where we made the mark on the knuckle to the frame is what, Frank?
15 1/8.
15 1/8. So we write on a piece of paper or mark it somewhere, 15 1/8.
Or mark.
There we go. And we don't have to worry about the customer complaining because the water and dirt will rub that off anyway. Remove the castellated nut. We loosen the jam nut here. That ensures the tie rod will not come free from the inner. Want me to swing it? There we go. So now what we can undo is we can unthread this. It's pretty tight on there, so we might actually have to heat it up. Sometimes they unwind, sometimes they don't. Okay, so I think we're gonna have to somehow maybe heat the inner here in order to, the outer, in order to remove it from the inner. Okay, so we managed to get it free from the inner. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna count the threads. As we unwind this outer from the inner, we're gonna count how many turns, and that will be our starting point before we do our fine-tune adjustments, so we ensure that our wheels are going straight down the road. So we're at 2,
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
13,
11, 12,
4,
12,
so 12.
12 and
Well,
a little bit.
yeah. So we're going to put it on 12 turns. What we should do now is make sure that this jam nut is nice and free. Okay, it's pretty tight on there. So it's always a good idea to clean these threads and put a little anti-seize on there. That way, if we ever have to replace this tie rod again, then it will make it a lot easier to do the next time. Yeah, I'll show them that. Because as you can see, this is the... is this the curb side? No, this is not the curb side. Usually it's the right side we're replacing, the curb side, the side that hits the curbs and so on.
Well, you didn't want to show them that ball?
Yeah, so this is the ball joint here. You can see when I lift the dust boot, okay, you see the ball and socket joint in there. You see how it's filled with rust. And so that's why you always have to make sure that when you replace any of these components, here's a tie rod, or sorry, a stabilizer link that was done today. And you can see the ball and socket joint is inside this rubber boot. You have to be careful about these rubber boots. You might not think it does a whole lot, but it does. It protects that joint in there. If that rips, or if this one rips, or same with the ball joint, water gets in there, and that's the beginning of the end of them. So this one has been, you can see all the rust in there, okay? And it's very sloppy. So that's why we're replacing this outer tie rod. We make sure that it matches up, the new one matches up with the old one before we install it. Okay, looks good. The jam nut is seized. We want to make sure that's free, so that way when we go to make our final adjustments, we're not fighting with it. So we're just going to put a little bit of heat on it.